Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Leslie Korn. Welcome to Nutrition Essentials for Clinicians, culinary medicine to improve mood, sleep, attention, and focus. And here before you, you see a beautiful bowl of red cherries, which are rich in anthocyanins. They're very powerful antioxidants. And I've given you a recipe to make a cherry chamomile smoothie right away when you feel you need to get a little bit improved sleep. Because cherries have been shown through research to stimulate melatonin, our sleep hormone. And I provided this recipe to you in my new book, Eat Right, Feel Right. Nutritional self-care is psychoeducation. And the way I approach this with my clients as a mental health clinician is to support educating my clients about the role of nutrition in their mental health and physical well-being, because we know mind and body interact with each other to create a good mood and a good sense of well-being. As mental health clinicians, it's rare, however, that we've received training in nutritional therapy, and often it might be beyond our scope of practice, or indeed it may not even be legal to practice nutritional therapy in the state in which we live. So I want to begin by orienting you to the ethics and scope of practice issues you might consider as you integrate nutritional psychoeducation into your client's care plan. The first thing to consider in ethics is your scope of practice. Are you trained to practice nutritional therapy? Do you have a background in nutrition? Now, there's much of what we'll talk about today that comes under the rubric of psychoeducation. It does not take a nutrition degree to ask a client who's very anxious or who experiences insomnia whether they're drinking a lot of coffee. Or it doesn't take a nutrition degree to ask a client if they're eating breakfast in the morning or if they're eating lots of sugars and sweets. So there's some very basic self-care information that we can support our clients with. And many of our clients are coming to us with these questions, wondering how nutrition can support their well-being. And so consider that what we explore today will come under this end of the spectrum called self-care psychoeducation. Now, as you continue to explore the role of nutrition in your clients' lives and their well-being, as well as your own, you may need to explore getting more training, becoming more competent if you want to be a primary advisor and guide to your client. For example, I have many clients who want to decrease the amount of coffee they're drinking. They do feel anxious. They do have a hard time sleeping, and it just exacerbates their already existing anxiety. And I might help them detoxify from caffeine by recommending a supplement called tyrosine. But one needs to have training and knowledge in nutritional therapy or as a registered dietitian to know that tyrosine is an amino acid that will help replace the caffeine in a natural, non-anxiety provoking way. And so that I would consider at the other end of the spectrum of having true professional competency in nutritional therapies. And in that case, as a mental health clinician, I would advise my client, you know, there are alternatives to coffee. Why don't I refer you to a colleague who's an expert in this area? In the meantime, I'm going to help you reduce your caffeine intake, and we'll explore that while we get that appointment. Now, the other thing to think about, in addition to your own clinical competency, is whether the state in which you reside and practice will allow for the practice of nutritional therapy. And I've provided you here with a PowerPoint URL that will take you to the Nutrition Advocacy Center, which highlights every state in the United States that will give you the guidelines about whether you can practice. Some states, like Washington State, where I spend part of my year and practice, will allow anybody to practice nutritional therapy and give nutritional advice. Some states, like North Carolina, will not. You need to be a licensed, registered dietitian. And so this also will inform your choices as you may choose to move beyond psychoeducation of nutritional health for your client. That may inform how quickly you bring a licensed registered dietitian in. Nevertheless, our clients want this information. They're often going to the internet to explore their options for themselves. And we know from research that only half of our clients are telling us the kinds of supplements and vitamins and herbs that they're taking. And so no matter what role I'm going to play as a mental health provider, I want to take that information in on an assessment so I can help my client make good, positive choices for his or her health. And I provided you with this disclaimer to review briefly. Mental health, nutrition, and cognitive repair. Dr. Alan Gaby, who's a physician nutritionist, has this wonderful saying, from Big Mac to Zantac to Prozac, all because of the SAD diet, the standard American diet. We begin by eating junk food full of sugar, refined flours, all of which are quite inflammatory. We then get indigestion and we take digestive aids and antacids, which affect our ability to make neurotransmitters for the brain. And then by this time we're depressed and we go on an SSRI, Prozac. Some of the ideas I want to share with you today are going to give you options to guide your clients to make positive choices, because I guarantee you, as clients improve their nutrition, they will improve their mental well-being. Diet and digestion is the missing link in mental health. I guarantee if your client will make positive improvements in her or his diet and nutritional status, you will get 25, 35, 50%, sometimes 75% improvement in their overall sense of well-being, particularly their mood and their cognitive function. And as you look at this picture of the inner organs of our digestive system, just think about the process of digestion very briefly. We begin by chewing in the mouth, which is going to stimulate not only digestive juices, but also a parasympathetic response, because digestive juices require a relaxed state in order to flow. And so rather than gulping down food, I teach my clients to chew slowly and to pulverize and liquefy the food that's in their mouth so that as they swallow it, it flows smoothly down the esophageal sphincter into the stomach. And so many of our clients experience GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disorder. Did you know that there's a very high correlation between GERD and PTSD? And that makes sense because PTSD often involves a hypersympathetic response. And so it really disrupts the digestive process. We've long known, for example, the connection between colitis and inflammatory bowel disorder and anxiety. And in mental health, we've often been taught to teach our clients to relax and breathe in order to improve their digestion. However, with the new knowledge and the new science about the second brain, about the role of our gut, of our small intestine and large intestine in regulating neurotransmitters, we know that not only will relaxation aid digestion, but improving digestion by improving our gut function, will aid relaxation. And so here is where mental health and digestion is bidirectional. In particular, we know that GABA, the anxiolytic neurotransmitter, is made in the small intestine. And if we're taking lots of pharmaceuticals, antacids, lots of stress, there are a whole variety of interactions that will decrease GABA production in the gut. And so consider this in particular with your clients who are anxious. And a little bit later, I'm going to talk about fermented foods, one of the best approaches to enhancing gut function because it brings probiotics to us. If we continue further down from the small intestine into the large intestine, into the colon, this is where the garden resides, the garden of bacteria that supports our physical and mental health. We know that there are high rates of colitis and inflammatory bowel disease and also constipation and hemorrhoids in people with histories of adverse childhood events, child sexual abuse. And so here again is where we can help our clients who come to us and who often don't have the connection made for them between their physical well-being and their emotional well-being. And we can advise and support how they can improve their overall digestive process from chewing and chewing mindfully all through the digestive process through elimination. What are the essentials of mental health nutrition? There is no one right diet for everyone. And this is the essence of my theme today. And this will put to rest any questions you have about the latest fad, the latest knowledge about what's the best diet. There is no one right diet. And that is the wonderful thing about our work with clients. Just as we tailor our interventions and our treatment and our care for emotional health, so does it need to be tailored to the individual. For example, I work with Native peoples in Alaska. Many Native peoples in Alaska, the Inuit, for example, how did their body minds evolve in that tundra, in that environment? They evolved with nutrition that is very high in fat, moderate amounts of protein, and very low in carbohydrates. All those beautiful berries and roots that pop up for just a few short months during the summer. Those bodies and those minds thrive on a high-fat, moderate protein, and low-carb diet, just like many indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, where I work as well. However, when I work with a client who is originally from India, the origins, the geographic origins of vegetarianism, they are going to thrive in their mind and body with a higher carbohydrate diet of more fruits, more vegetables, more legumes, along with some proteins, nuts, and some animal proteins as well. And so all of us, no matter where we came from, and many of us are a mixture of people, whether we're from Africa, Asia, Europe, we are the products of who our parents were and our grandparents. And those are genetic and environmental determinants that define how we best digest food. Now, short of undergoing elaborate laboratory tests, which we can do, and I do with clients, one of the first place I start with a client is I ask them, what foods make you feel best and what makes you feel worst? And believe it or not, there's no place on earth where people thrive on white sugar and white flour and Coca-Cola. And so there are a whole lot of foods that we can help right away our clients eliminate as they're exploring the effects of food on their mood. Another basic principle is food needs to be fresh and nutrient dense. As I travel throughout the United States, I noticed that many people don't cook anymore. And so one of the first psycho-ed supports I do with my clients is support them to begin preparing fresh food and develop a refined taste for those fresh foods. If I have a client who's heavily salting her food, she may not be able to taste the natural saltiness, the natural sodium in celery or lettuce, for example. I want to support her to combine both raw and cooked foods. Now, many people who've been chronically ill with PTSD, with anxiety, with colitis and IBS may not be able to digest raw foods. And they'll say, oh, I don't digest raw foods well. In that case, I help them begin by choosing a fruit or vegetable that they enjoy and cooking it and begin to eat, for example, a baked apple before they try a raw apple, or steamed broccoli before they chew on some raw broccoli. I also support my clients to avoid what are called excitotoxins and additives. It's very easy to give up some of these addictive substances which trigger neuronal excitatory effects in the brain. These are particularly glutamate receptors that get very excited and can alter mood. These are the kinds of additives like sugar, sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, and those substitutes. Aspartame, for example, has been shown through research to alter mood lability, particularly in vulnerable people with a bipolar diagnosis. And so I work with people to exchange, for example, artificial sweetener with something like stevia or xylitol, something, or even a little raw honey is going to be a better alternative. And in these cases, I give recipes for making a lime Ricky, for example, of lime juice and soda water or bubbly water, mineral water, along with a little stevia and fresh berries like fresh raspberries. And I teach my clients to change out some of these additives that are having an adverse effect on their focus and attention and their mood. I support and teach about what I call the Brainbow Diet. I don't begin with teaching about vitamins and minerals and counting calories, certainly. I talk about drawing all of our nutrients from the range of the colors of the rainbow and shopping and buying fruits and vegetables with greens and reds and orange and yellow in order to get the whole range of nutrients and minerals that are going to support our mental health. Even small changes make a difference. One of the best first changes that people can make is substituting good quality oils for the harmful trans fats that they're using in their lives. And then again, I work to help people identify what makes them feel best and makes them feel worse. And after all, we're already doing this in our clinical work with clients as we help them get in touch with what they need and access what they need. What we're doing here is we're building in nutrition and emotional nourishment through the self-care process. It's very important to integrate psychology and mindful eating into our work. And I do this during the assessment process. I want to explore the meaning of food in my client's life, whether they're food gathering and preparing, how they're doing that, are they in charge, or is someone else in their family in charge of that? Do they feel in control of it? Do they have choices? Are they under stress? Are they food insecure due to finances, due to location? I want to explore the history of food in their family and what kind of diet they grew up with. Research suggests that infants who do not have access to good essential fatty acids during the first year of life are vulnerable to learning disorders by age 10. We know that dairy can be an allergen that can contribute to chronic ear infections in childhood? And do those chronic ear infections, did they lead to chronic antibiotic use, which upset the garden of the colon by killing off all the beneficial bacteria, which in turn could affect GABA and neurotransmitters and the ability to manage anxiety? There are so many intersections between our lives as children and adolescents and the diet we had and how it may be affecting our health as adolescents and adults, as well as in older years. I also want to explore the emotional feelings and affect that occurred during food eating, during experiences with the family. Were they joyous or were they filled with fighting? Was there a variety of abuses of different kinds of foods or substances? All of these are going to affect how our clients are engaged in nutritional self-care today. And one of the things that I use when I begin with a client is my food mood diary. This is a 3-day diary that I ask my clients to keep that charts everything they eat, what time they eat, and also how they feel after eating and subsequently, in order to chart the relationship between how they're eating, when they're eating, and how it makes them feel. And then together we sit down and we explore some of those findings. And I've constructed this food mood diary, which is available in my book, Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health, for the mental health clinician. And I provide you with a clinician checklist that walks you through an analysis of this food mood diary. It helps you identify some of the key areas where you can begin to help your client. If you, for example, notice that they're drinking 6 cups of coffee a day and they're complaining about anxiety, or perhaps if they have headaches, maybe they aren't eating breakfast, or maybe they're dehydrated, or maybe they're eating lots of carbohydrates and sugars and they're not getting enough protein. So I walk you through some very basic psychoeducational analysis of how they can improve their emotional nourishment through their physical nourishment. As I mentioned earlier, I teach my clients about chewing as a mindful activity, and I also teach them to put the fork down between each mouthful. And there's a wonderful little biofeedback instrument called the Happy Fork. And this is a little fork that if you're shoveling food in too quickly, it rings, it buzzes, and it reminds you, oh, put the fork down. I've lost awareness of what I'm doing. I've lost mindfulness. And it teaches me, breathe and calm down and engage in this parasympathetic relaxation of self-nourishment. Now, this is helpful for everyone, but this is especially important for our clients with eating disorders, particularly bulimia or night eating syndrome as well. What are some of the nutritional change principles? Identify positive changes that are doable. Identify substitutions that are doable. Remember that lime Ricky with a stevia. It still gives that bubbly taste that people often crave. It gives some sweetness. It's a nice afternoon snack that many people go and grab their artificial soda pop for, but it gives them an alternative. I give people an alternative when I suggest they eat delicious butter instead of margarine, or get some good organic olive oil instead of safflower or corn oil. I want to help it be easy for my clients to make a switch that's going to be really profound in its results. I want to help my clients identify and eliminate addictive foods one at a time. Some addictive foods you'll need to cold turkey, there's no question, but some we can slowly reduce. And one of the biggest things that I've seen clients addicted to is sugar. We often crave sugar because we want sweet, we want to self-soothe, but also sugar gives a momentary rush of energy. I want to support my clients to get real energy that's sustaining, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a little bit. The other thing that I teach my clients about is I help them decrease the dissociation that we all experience related to nutrition and mood. We're not taught that there's a relationship between what we eat and how we feel. And indeed, we're actually often taught quite the opposite. Now, we're already working with supporting clients who feel dissociated, who feel out of their bodies, who don't feel within their bodies. And so this goes the next step between not only helping those clients, but helping almost anyone for whom the connection has not yet been made that what we eat has profound effects on our mood and our energy. I don't believe in deprivation. We will not succeed with supporting change with our clients if they feel deprived. And so I've given you lots of recipes in my book, Eat Right, Feel Right, like an afternoon chocolate mocha smoothie with stevia and coconut oil, which is so good for cognition and mood and energy. And so finding these substitutions and providing more natural approaches to manage mood and manage energy is the key to our success and the key to client compliance. Some of the things that I look for in the food mood diary is the timing of food intake. For example, have they gone 12 or 14, 16 hours without food, and is their blood sugar low? Because mood follows food. If our blood sugar is low, our mood is low. If our blood sugar is stable, our mood is stable. So I want to look at how often they're eating. I want to look at how many hours there are between their meals. And importantly, I want to look at their protein sources. Are they getting enough protein in their dietary intake? Because the only source for the creation of neurotransmitters, those brain chemicals that support mood and energy and focus, is protein. I want to look at sugar and caffeine intake, the use of stimulants. Are people propping themselves up with stimulants, and or are they sedating themselves with lots of carbohydrates? I want to look at the fat quality, because fat quality as well as sugar intake promotes either anti-inflammatory effects or, in the case of sugar and poor quality fats, inflammatory effects. And we know that inflammation underlies depression. One of the most important interventions we can make for depression is to decrease inflammatory process in the body. Hydration. Hydration is very important for reduction of pain, mobility, and mood. Reduction of artificial sweeteners, and of course, poor quality fats, as I mentioned a moment ago. So the first step is balance mood with food. When I'm working with a client who's very mood labile, they may come to me with a diagnosis, or they may come for a diagnosis, or someone may feel moody and irritable. Maybe a child or an adolescent with an ADHD diagnosis. I don't really know what their baseline is unless I have worked with them to balance out their mood with food. If I have a child who's going off to school with just cereal in his belly, he may not be getting the right nutrition for his brain, and he may bounce off the walls an hour and a half later, or melt down and cry, or have a temper tantrum. That child may do better on eggs with a little bit of butter for breakfast rather than pure refined carbohydrates. And so I'm going to work with that child or the adult to balance out their mood through food. And one of the best ways to do this is to do a 7-day trial of eliminating all refined carbohydrates and most carbohydrates. And this is where you go on a protein and fat diet with 1 salad a day, 1 serving of vegetables, and 1 piece of fruit. And after 7 days, I guarantee you people's moods feel much better. Now do we get a 10% improvement, 15%, a 50% improvement? We don't know what someone's baseline mood is like until they're off refined foods and various stimulants that move people up and down throughout the day. And so this is what I would call a refined Atkins diet, or a paleo diet, in which we're really eliminating all grains and all carbohydrates, with the exception of some vegetables and some fruits, but really focusing on proteins and fats for 7 days. Then my client comes back in, having kept a food mood diary, and we explore what works, what didn't, when did they feel their mood drop, or did they feel it stabilize throughout the day. I explored this approach further in my book, Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health. And here is a graphic of the rainbow diet. You can see all the beautiful colors of the rainbow, the different kinds of foods, fruits, and vegetables to choose from, and they all represent different vitamins and minerals. And at the bottom are the wonderful protein sources. Let's review the spectrum of foods in the rainbow diet. As I mentioned, it can range from carnivore to vegetarian. Some people, like my Inuit clients, are natural carnivores. Some are vegetarian, and some are in between. And when I have a client who's feeling anxious or depressed, or maybe even is having panic attacks, I'm going to explore whether their dietary intake is aligned with their genetic requirements. It is very common, particularly in my practice, it may be in yours as well, that people may choose to be a vegetarian, and I appreciate vegetarianism for the spiritual and moral aspects of it, having been a vegetarian for many years, but my Inuit client would not do well on a vegetarian diet. And so some of my clients, for example, who are new to vegetarianism may notice an increase in anxiety because of how a vegetarian diet may affect their metabolic function. And it can increase their anxiety and depression. And so just as someone who is eating way too much meat or animal protein may need more vegetables, and that can create depression and chronic pain as well. Now, this is all an advanced analysis of my client's well-being that I explore further in my clinical text, but I want you to be familiar with where the science has gone and where we are today, and understanding that if we're not aligned with our metabolic heritage and our genetic heritage, and we're not eating the right ratios of proteins and carbohydrates and fats, then that can affect our mood and our mental health. So what is this spectrum that we might explore in terms of proteins? Animal proteins, fish, dairy, nuts, and legumes all represent good quality proteins for our mental health. Dairy. There's quite a bit of research that suggests cow's dairy is not a very healthy dairy for most of the world's population. And indeed, unless you're genetically from northern Scandinavia, 90% of the population will not do well with cow's dairy. And I begin by suggesting to my clients that they transition off cow's dairy and choose a goat dairy or a sheep dairy. And there are also laboratory tests to check on sensitivity to dairy and allergy to both casein and lactose. And there's quite a bit of research supporting sensitivity to both of these chemicals and sugars in autism spectrum disorder, but not limited to ASD as well. Eggs, there is no more perfect food in your diet than eggs. They're very rich in acetylcholine, which supports memory and focus function in the brain. I ask my clients to have at least 2 eggs a day, and they're perfect protein to boil up and take as a hard-boiled egg with you when you're on the road or running to work. And so I encourage that child, for example, to grab a couple of hard-boiled eggs to support her focus when she's going to school in the morning. Certainly, we've got choices of meats that include both saturated fats, which are essential to absorb our vitamins A, D, E, and K. Contrary to what you've heard, saturated fats are not bad for you. They're actually required. And whether they come from animal protein or from nuts will be an option for you. Some of the best butters, the best fats are butter, coconut oil, sesame oil, and of course raw nuts are a great source of those healthy fats. Root vegetables are one of the perfect vegetables for overcoming an addiction to sugar. They're naturally sweet when you bake them, and you can top them with a little butter, a little sea salt, which is very good for your adrenal glands to help you overcome stress. And it's something that I suggest my clients who have a sugar addiction have once or twice a day. Particularly good for people coming off alcohol and drug abuse too, because it's very easy to digest. And these clients are often not eating, very rich in vitamin A. And indeed, peoples of Okinawa are believed to live until 100 and 110 because of their ingestion of the lovely sweet potato. It's very important to have soluble fibers in your diet as well. That sets the stage for our healthy garden in our gut. Those include flax, oatmeal, psyllium seed, fruits and vegetables. And this is why juicing can be very healthy for you, but if you only get your vegetables or fruits through juice, you're missing those wonderful fibers that help cleanse the colon and eliminate waste and bad bacteria. Fresh greens go without saying, both cooked and raw, and some greens are best eaten cooked. Spinach, for example, should be eaten only cooked. Kale, I know we're on a big raw kale craze. A little bit of raw kale is okay, but we get more nutrients when it's cooked. And also, if our clients have depression coupled with hypothyroidism, kale and the cruciferous vegetables can depress thyroid function. And so a client may be inadvertently exacerbating thyroid function if they're eating too much raw kale. And I've mentioned fermented foods. If you're not already integrating wonderful fresh sauerkraut or fresh kimchi or a fermented goat milk into your diet, there is no better food for the brain and the mood than fermented foods. Of course, fruits like berries, very rich in antioxidants. And some people will do okay with grains. Many people do not. And so depending upon my client and depending upon their use of grains, we may decrease the amount of grains or they may do all right. That's something we explore in a more advanced analysis. As I mentioned, mood follows food. And so it's very important to assess for functional hypoglycemia. As the sugar goes up during the day, so does the mood. As it drops, the mood drops. As it goes up and down throughout the day, mood follows food. So my first goal is to stabilize mood with food. These individuals will do well eating every 2 to 3 hours and always combining a little bit of protein and fat with a carbohydrate. These individuals will not do well eating just a carbohydrate. So don't go for that coffee and a donut. Certainly get rid of the donuts and go for some nuts and some fruit or a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or maybe some beans. Substitute out that stimulant to increase mood with something that will stabilize it in a true, real way. I also support my clients with some very basic nutrients for which there's no contraindication, so you can feel very safe making these recommendations. A good complex B vitamin we know will support neurological function, it will support mood. It's very important that it's rich in B6. We know that B6 supports neurotransmitter synthesis. And so that's actually why you'll see some B6 even added to some psychotropic medication compounds today. So a B complex vitamin is a very good place to start. And if you can get it with chromium and vanadium, all the better. Otherwise, an additional nutrient would be chromium. Chromium is excellent for managing blood glucose, not only in mood disorders, but in diabetes or in pre-diabetic syndrome as well. And there is a relationship between pre-diabetes, diabetes, chronic stress, and mood lability, because it all begins with the stress of the adrenal glands and the inability to manage blood glucose handling. And so chromium will help you do that. And also with clients who have eating disorders, it will manage cravings as well. So chromium will also decrease your cravings. And another herbal tea that I use is licorice tea. And if you research licorice, you'll know it is used in Ayurvedic medicine, in Chinese medicine, and in native medicine of the United States. So well regarded is this wonderful root. It's very supportive for adrenal function. It's actually got a nice sweet taste to it, and I substitute it when I'm working with someone coming off tobacco. I ask them to get a few licorice sticks and they can chew on them. It has a nice sweet taste, but it will help the detoxifying process, help the craving process, but it'll also give a natural substitute for the sweet that people crave. Now, the only contraindication to consider when you're using licorice root is that it can cause some sodium retention, which will cause water retention. And so if you've got a client who's hypertensive, and many of our clients with PTSD are hypertensive, I want to go a little easy on licorice. Maybe a cup every few days is about how I would use licorice root tea. But there is no better herb for supporting mood and blood glucose handling in people who are mood labile and hypoglycemic. Dehydration is very common. It's commonly undiagnosed, and yet it underlies a whole cascade of effects. And this can be part of our approach to gentle self-care nutrition for psychoeducation. Dehydration contributes to fatigue, depression, headaches, and pain. And if a client is dehydrated, they may not know it, and they may have a headache or they may have pain. They may self-medicate with an NSAID because they've got a headache, they've got pain, and then the NSAID can tear up their gut lining and affect the creation or the synthesis of neurotransmitters. It can have a negative effect on liver function, which can affect the ability to emulsify fats. And then you get this cascade of effects that really begins with dehydration. And so I've given you here a calculation to identify how much water or fluid we need in the course of a day. Calculate 30 to 50% of your body weight in ounces. So a 150-pound person needs about 50 to 75 ounces of water or broth, teas a day. One of the things that I consider when I'm working with clients who may be dehydrated are cultural values. Because I work with people who've migrated from Mexico and Central America and also work in Mexico, there's often a lack of access to potable water. And so people learn to drink alternative drinks, in particular sugary drinks or Coca-Cola instead of water, just because water is not hygienic. And so when I'm working with people, I want to explore the effects of cultural experience on their own practice of hydration. So integrate that into your assessment process as well. Let's talk a little bit about gluten and depression. We hear a lot about the effects of gluten on mood and depression. Gluten is a protein that's found in grains, in particular wheat and barley and rye. And the gliadins are the proteins within gluten, and they can create antibodies in the blood. And we can test for reactive response to gliadins. Now, there are different types of reaction to gluten. There's an allergy, which is a true autoimmune reaction, and about 1 in 250 people have this, and it's called celiac disease. Now, some researchers have estimated that as many as 1 in 10 people have what are called sensitivity to gluten that'll affect mood and digestive and neurological function. Some of these people are going to crave wheat and crave grains, and we see this particularly in bulimia where people crave refined carbohydrates, and this is why Overeaters Anonymous suggests that people completely eliminate wheat and gluten. Now, they discovered the effects of gluten on mental health in a very interesting way because not only does gluten affect depression and also chronic neurological disorders, but it's been found to be a common factor in psychotic disorders. And they discovered this during World War II in Great Britain when there was a shortage of wheat due to the war. And one of the side effects of that shortage is that people in the asylum, the people with psychotic disorders, got better. So we've long known about the effects of gluten on mental health. And we can test for this through laboratory tests. But if I have a client who can't necessarily afford an expensive laboratory test, I suggest an empirical approach to the research. And that means going off gluten altogether for 6 months because it takes a good 3 to 6 months to heal the inflamed intestinal mucosa that are often inflamed by the exposure to gluten. And some of the other symptoms of gluten sensitivity include joint stiffness, headaches, body stiffness, as well as depression. And again, these are sometimes symptoms that people are self-medicating with NSAIDs that just creates a vicious circle of reactions. So let's get to the causes of some of these symptoms rather than medicating them. And I've given you a reference here to a gluten-free apple hazelnut tart. And I really love to use ground nuts as a base for tarts and pies that you can fill with delicious fruits, or if it's vegetables, with quiches and eggs and good quality oils. And your client can feel like they're really taking care of themselves and they're not deprived at all. Bitter greens is a food that we don't often go for first, but I suggest cultivating a taste for bitter greens. And here you see some delicious dandelion greens that I gathered up from my front yard. Don't spray your dandelions. Gather them, clean them, and saute them. Bitter greens are one of the best foods for the liver. Our liver and gallbladder are essential to emulsify the essential fatty acids we need for our brain, which is, after all, 70% fat. And so if we can't break down those fats and get them to our brain, we're not going to get the benefits from the fats we're eating. And this refers also to the old-time practice of drinking some bitters after a fatty meal. And so however you get your bitters, add some bitters when you're having a nice, rich meal, and it will help break down fats, and you'll get better digestion as a result of it, and you'll hold on to your gallbladder as well. I've mentioned the importance of eating enough good quality protein. Proteins are our only source of amino acids. They're the building blocks of our neurotransmitter function. And so animal proteins are also the only source of vitamin B12. And we know vegetarians and vegans in particular, but also people who are older, may be low in B12, which is essential for mood and cognitive function. And I always want to look and assess this with my elders who are having diminished cognitive function, but also with my vegetarian clients who may not be focusing or as attentive or doing as well at school or at work. Low protein intake means low neurotransmitter function. And so what are some of our sources besides animal and plant proteins? There are certainly protein powders, and I think among the best are whey, if you're not sensitive to whey protein. Pea protein, hemp protein is one of the best of these protein powders. I would stay away from soy. It is a myth that soy is good for you. Soy depresses thyroid function. It depresses trypsin, a digestive enzyme. So stay away from soy protein powders. The other thing is there's amino acid supplementation. You heard me mention earlier when I talked about tyrosine. That's an amino acid that I might supplement with a client. But I also might use free amino acids. And that, again, is a more advanced level of understanding of nutritional therapy. But knowing that it's out there as a source gives you a place to go when you're discussing your client's health with a nutritional therapist. Hydration. Let's talk a little bit more about the principle of substitutions and how I apply it. I want to identify what my client is craving, and I want to understand it as a biochemical craving to alter consciousness. And then I want to help her identify some substitutions that are healthy, that will not lead to negative side effects. Let's take one of the most common addictions, alcohol addiction. At its core, alcohol addiction is an addiction to sugar. This is why we see people come off of alcohol, which is so important, but then they crave and they eat a lot of sugar. And this is because the liver is really addicted to sugar, and they still can experience a lot of the mood lability that they had on alcohol. It's just sugar in another form. And so I want to explore whether I'm working with medications, psychotropics, any kind of drug, alcohol, or even foods. What is my client craving? How are they trying to self-medicate with what they're eating or drinking? And what are the foods and nutrients there that I can use to replace that and still support the brain-mind function as they eliminate that addiction? I mentioned the use of sweet potatoes for breads and sweets. I'm a big fan of the use of smoothies, to which I add powdered nutrients. I use stevia to sweeten When I'm working with clients who are drinking too much coffee, I'll ask them to substitute decaffeinated coffee. And so a little bit of coffee is a drug. It's a good beverage. It will elevate mood. It will elevate depression. It will elevate cognition, but too much of it increases anxiety. And so I tell my clients, coffee is a drug, not a beverage. So use it like a drug. Use it consciously. One shot, no more than 2 shots of espresso or a little half a cup of drip coffee in the morning will boost your mood, will boost cognition, but more than that, sends you over into becoming inured to it, but also anxious as a result of it. I want to give them an alternative. That's where I give them my decaf coffee, chocolate mocha in the afternoon with cream and coconut cream and a little stevia to satisfy that need for blood sugar, energy in the afternoon, and a very tasty drink. And you can be as creative as you wish as you explore these recipes with your client. And I've given you dozens of them in my books. I begin with someone who's addicted to sugar by slowly weaning them off the intense refined cane sugar with a little raw honey or maple syrup and then stevia. Because again, we're supporting someone's not only their biochemical response to food, but we're also supporting their design and reclaiming their ability to taste food. If we bombard our taste buds all the time with these overwhelming sensations, we cannot taste the subtlety of these flavors. And this is analogous to what we do with our clients when we want to help them decrease the powerful stimulating behaviors that are not good for them and become satisfied with the simple self-care choices that they're making in their lives. So there's lots of analogies that I make to these processes when I'm working with my clients. I teach my client about food preparation as mindfulness meditation. Take this time to be with yourself, to smell these flavors, to taste the flavors, to prepare, to self-care, moment-to-moment self-nourishment. And I suggest that they have 3 tools in the kitchen, the crock pot, the thermos, and the blender. With that, you can make almost anything. And it's particularly good for people who don't know yet how to cook or who are very busy and don't have a lot of time to cook. You can throw lots of vegetables and protein into a crock pot, and in 8 hours, you've got a delicious stew waiting for you. I teach my clients to prep food 1 or maybe 2 days a week. Take 1 or 2 hours. Boil up a dozen eggs and put them in the fridge. Bake a dozen sweet potatoes, and you can have them cold or hot. You can reheat them with a little balsamic or add some butter. You can whip it up with a little whole cream. And by the way, whole cream is not as bad for you as cow's dairy because it's pure fat. It generally doesn't have the lactose that will affect you negatively. So don't be afraid of a little bit of whole cream. It's much better for you than a creamer in your coffee. I teach them to make a fresh salad, and I teach them to make salad jars in which they put out lots of cut vegetables in front of them and take a jar just like this water jar that I have. And they can layer the hard root vegetables at the bottom like the beets or the carrots and the onions, and then they can add some of the leafy greens as they move towards the top with some sprouts, and then top with some seeds and nuts. And then I teach them to make a jar full of fresh salad dressing. And here's where they can get their healthy medicinal fats for the week just by mixing a little hemp oil, a little flax oil, and a little olive oil. They can season it with cayenne pepper or dill weed or dill seed or sage, whatever they love, and then shake it up and keep it in the fridge. They can make a bottle with lemon. They can make a bottle with apple cider vinegar. And this will make food preparation and food and mealtime much more efficient, and people then will have the food they need when they need it rather than want to grab something on the run. I've given you some ideas in my book for making baked chicken. You can then put that in some Tupperware in different containers and grab a Tupperware for lunch. I've given you also a recipe to use a plant that I want to introduce you to if you're not familiar with it. It's called Jamaica. It's also known as roselle. And this is a wonderful, cost-effective plant that's very bright red, rich in anthocyanins, and it's a wonderful source of an antioxidant and a delicious berry-tasting plant. You can get it at any local Mexican food store. It's called Jamaica, and it's very rich in vitamin C. And particularly with our clients who may not be able to afford fresh berries or even frozen berries, Jamaica will give you a very cost-effective drink. You can sweeten it with stevia. I even make a recipe called Jamaica Hello for Jamaica Jello, in which I top it with coconut cream. And it's a wonderful, healthy dessert made of collagen and gelatin, very rich in glycine, which is very good for mood. It's sweet. It's giving me antioxidants. It's giving me wonderful fat to absorb those nutrients, and it's a very healthy dessert. And I've given you also a recipe for Jamaica Chia Berry Balancer in Eat Right, Feel Right. Finally, I want to talk about soaking dried nuts and fruits. And one of the benefits you get from soaking nuts and fruits is not only do you get some delicious natural sweet syrup that you can put on your oatmeal without using any kind of artificial or added sugar, but it makes it easier to digest for people who have trouble with digestion. And so what I do is I take a handful of nuts, preferably almonds or walnuts. I add a few raisins, and I cover them with water in a little jar or a little glass, and I soak it overnight, and then I can take those nuts and fruits with me to work, and I can drain off some of the liquid for oatmeal, or I can add it as a sweetener to my smoothie. If you're not already making bone broths, I encourage you to do this as your next step for mental health nutrition. Bone broths are cost effective. You can get organic marrow bones, organic chicken bones for $2 a pound. So they're very good as a resource for clients who may not have access to lots of resources to buy organic meats or organic chickens. Very easy to make a bone broth by putting bones in a crock pot, covering it with water, and letting it simmer, adding a little bit of vinegar. This will pull out the minerals that are so important for the brain and the mind and the body. Bone broth is very rich in glycine, and you heard me mention it because it's rich in, found in gelatin as well. And glycine is used for the treatment of psychotic disorders, the use of panic disorder as well. What we're talking about today is the use of authentic foods. And that's what I ask you to consider when you're exploring foods. Is this a real food? Is this an authentic food? And are these foods authentic to a cultural tradition? And this allows us to be culturally competent also in our work with clients across cultures. I find very often that my clients want to discuss their own food and nutrition traditions, especially if they're recently arrived in the United States or migrated, or maybe they're first, second, third generation. Explore these authentic food traditions. What are they? They are always low in sugar. You won't find high sugar in any natural, authentic food anywhere in the world. Even sugar cane is very high in fiber and B vitamins and does not cause diabetes if you chew on some sugar cane. It's the sugar extracted and concentrated from sugar cane that contributes to poor health. These authentic foods are also anti-inflammatory. They're rich in omega-3 fatty acids. All throughout the world, you find omega-3 fatty acids because they're essential to our health as human beings. Generally, we've got low to moderate complex carbohydrates, moderate protein, and moderate to high fat. You'll see this depending upon the range. Let's consider again the Inuit on one end of the spectrum and Southeast Asian Indians on the other end of the spectrum, and many others in between. We'll find antioxidants everywhere throughout the world as well. Fibers, also called prebiotics, are found everywhere. These are the prebiotics that set the stage, that till our garden, that allow probiotics to plant the seed to increase our wonderful healthy bacteria in our gut. So I encourage you to use these bark flowers, psyllium, chia, bran, and oatmeal. And indeed, I've made here a smoothie with berries. I've got cherries and blueberries. I've got mango in here, chia seeds, flax seeds, a little bit of coconut oil. So I'm going to taste a little bit. Create your own recipe, or I'll provide you with some options. I'm getting my prebiotics there in the chia seeds, which are also very rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Chia is an authentic food indigenous to northern Mexico. And of course, the fermented foods, they're enzyme rich for digestion and colon health. Now, when I'm working with a client, let's say, who's come to me, he's got poor digestion, he's sleepless, he's drinking more than he wants, he's put on some weight as he's aged, and he wants to change. And I do a food mood intake, and he tells me he's eating lots of prepared meats. He's buying lunch meats. He's eating hot dogs, and he throws on some bottled sauerkraut. I'm not going to suggest that he make a kale smoothie right away or soak some almonds. That is just not going to be isomorphic to his current frame of mind and belief system. We might get there in the future. I want to educate him and say, why not get a good quality hot dog, an organic hot dog without fillers and red dyes and additives that are excitotoxins for your brain, that are giving you more sugar than you want. And if you like sauerkraut, why not go to the farmer's market and get a fresh sauerkraut? It'll support the bacteria in your gut. And so again, this isn't about deprivation. It's about increasing the authentic foods that our clients can access and educating them about what will make a difference in their well-being. I've given you here some pictures of some traditional foods of the Pacific Northwest. These are some authentic foods. These are the traditional foods, and this is actually a photo from a food feast that we put on with some of the tribal communities who are in the process of revitalizing traditional food practices for mental and physical health. You see some beautiful fish eggs, clams, and the little smoked smelt, also called ooligan. And so central is ooligan to the whole Pacific Northwest that the name Oregon comes from the name of this little tiny smelt that is so rich in omega-3 fatty acids. It has sustained indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest for millennia. And you also see some cattails, and cattails are dried and pulverized and made into cattail flour, gluten-free cattail flour. Here's a photo from Eastern Europe. This is the foods where my people are from. From Russia and Germany, Romania, beets. You cannot beat beets as a food for mental health. They're very rich in betaine, which supports phase 2 detoxification in the liver. You see those beet greens, which are bitter and support the gallbladder. There is no better food for you than beets, so cultivate a taste for beets. whether you put a little bit of raw beet in your salad, or whether you juice it and add a little bit to your carrot juice, or whether you steam it and top it with a little fermented yogurt, as in borscht. Cultivate a taste for beets, and I guarantee you your liver will be very happy. And here's a photo from Inuit country. The food's really rich in fat, wild game, very few carbohydrates. And remember, what were the foods endemic to the Western Hemisphere prior to contact from Europe? There was no cow, and therefore no cow dairy. There was no wheat, no gluten. There were no pigs, no lard. So think about the role of culture, the environment, and what we're suited for. What are the foods that nourish our genetics and our brain, mind, body? And here are the wonderful foods from Ireland. The salmon and seaweed are the traditional foods from Ireland that have nourished the Celtic people for millennia. And of course, Mexico, corn, one of the traditional foods, but Mexico's also given us many of the nightshades, such as tomatoes and chilies. And one thing to keep in mind is that 50% of the population are sensitive to nightshades, and nightshades can cause inflammatory process and lead to joint stiffness and symptoms of arthritis. And I've had many a client who was able to get off chronic NSAID use and whose mood lifted because it turned out that they were allergic to nightshades and they were eating lots of chilies and tomatoes and eggplant among some of the nightshades. So pay attention to whether you're genetically aligned with the nightshade foods that are endemic to Mexico. One of our key strategies here, as you can tell, is to reduce low-level inflammation in the body. Think about what inflammation is. Think about the last time you stubbed your toe. We whack our toe, it hurts, and soon the body brings lots of fluid and cells to the area of injury to soothe that area and to bring healing nutrients. But in the process, it swells, it's red, and it's painful until it subsides. Low-level inflammation underlies depression. This is the new model of depression and much of poor mental health. And indeed, this was a model that went back to the 50s and was forgotten in terms of brain function and phospholipid function in the brain. We're now understanding the role of chronic inflammatory process, and one of the biggest causes of inflammation are these pro-inflammatory foods that are not authentic. And so one of the first things I ask my clients to do is reduce the inflammatory foods and increase the anti-inflammatory foods. Because low-level inflammation is like I'm banging my toe and stubbing it every day. I'm not giving my toe a chance to heal and reduce that inflammation when I continue to eat these pro-inflammatory foods. It's also understood to be behind cognitive decline. And the new model of cognitive decline and dementia involves chronic inflammatory process in the brain. And indeed, dementia is now called diabetes type 3. So closely are these processes related between inflammatory process, depression, diabetes, and cognitive decline. So avoid these inflammatory foods, trans fats, non-cold pressed oils, packaged foods, these additives that I spoke about earlier, white flour, sugar. Avoid gluten if sensitive, and avoid cow's dairy. And again, consider the concept of substitutions. If we don't give our clients a way to substitute effectively, we will lose their adherence and their compliance, and they will feel demoralized. Eat the anti-inflammatory foods, those wonderful red and blue berries, cherries, jamaica, turmeric, and ginger. And remember, what the Indians know in their authentic knowledge in making chai is that turmeric must be mixed with black pepper in order to be absorbed. If you're taking a turmeric substance like a supplement, or if you're drinking turmeric tea to get your curcumin, it must be with black pepper in order to absorb it. And I've given you a recipe for chai that mixes turmeric, ginger, black tea, or green tea. And one of the reasons green tea is so effective for mood and mental health is that it contains the amino acid theanine. And so rather than get that kind of excited, hyper response that we can get from caffeine and coffee, the theanine in green tea calms that down. It balances out the caffeine effect. And so when I'm working with someone coming off of coffee, this is a recipe that I would suggest they use. And the green tea will still give them a little mood boost, still give them some energy, but it won't hype them up too much. Anti-inflammatory foods are rich in vitamin D and vitamin E. Papaya and bromelain. This is why when you go out to a Thai restaurant, not a Thai restaurant, a Vietnamese restaurant, order that green papaya salad. And I'll tell you an interesting story. When I first arrived in the jungle of Mexico, I noticed that men had freshly slaughtered a cow, and observed that one of the men was climbing a papaya tree and was taking down several green papaya, and he was slicing the skin off the papaya while it was green, and out oozed a white sticky substance. And he took that skin and he lay that along the whole side of beef, because papaya, or papain, the proteolytic enzyme in papaya, is a meat tenderizer. It's indeed the main ingredient in Adolph's meat tenderizer, if anyone uses that anymore. But what we know about these proteolytic enzymes, like papain, is it digests inflammation. And so the same with bromelain. Bromelain is the proteolytic enzyme found in the core of an unripe pineapple. Now, we don't tend to eat green papaya unless we're making a green papaya salad. We don't tend to have access to this. But we do get these proteolytic enzymes in the form of supplements and nutrients. They're very cost effective, and they will digest inflammatory process. And this becomes part of the protocol I use with clients who have depression and pain, because those two, as we well know, are two sides of the same coin. If I can reduce inflammation in these clients, I can reduce depression and their pain. So study more about bromelain and papain. You will not be sorry. And then, of course, fish oil is a wonderful anti-inflammatory, but remember, your bitter greens are going to help you utilize the fish oil more efficiently. Cook with these anti-inflammatory spices. Cook with roots. Turmeric root is a very cost-effective way to incorporate anti-inflammatory into your diet. Cook with ginger. Saffron has been shown through scientific research to have an antidepressive effect. It's not inexpensive, but occasionally it's well worth it. And I make a tea out of ginger root and then add a little bit of stevia to it. And I teach my clients how to do this as well. I've talked a bit about eating good quality fats: olive oil, raw butter, sesame oil, coconut fat, almonds, walnuts, hemp, and chia. We get good quality fats from wild game, animal, eggs. We can also get good quality fats from supplements or capsules, but in this case, quality is everything. You must be sure of the quality of your sources. And also keep in mind that bottled sources of fats are going to be less expensive than our supplements in capsule form. We don't often think about gamma-linoleic acid, GLA, but it's often a missing piece for the requirement for good mental health. If you're like me, I work with a lot of clients who have a combination of anxiety and dermatologic disorders, whether they're teens or adults, acne, psoriasis, eczema in particular, or atopic dermatitis. We know that there's a profound connection between anxiety and depression and dermatological disorders. And one of the most important things you can support your client to do is incorporate a gamma-linoleic acid oil into their diet. And I do this by adding it to my salad dressing at the appropriate dose, or add it to a smoothie with these clients. And indeed, we know there's a strong connection between adolescent acne and adult acne and sensitivity to dairy. And so I will use a borage seed oil with these clients. Evening primrose seeds is shown to support menopausal women in particular. Black currant seed is a GLA oil known to support women with endometriosis and challenges around perimenopause as well. Indeed, black currant seed oil reduces spasming in the uterus. And so that's a good option for that type of client. And then, of course, hemp seed oil. It's an easy oil to obtain. It's a very good support for endocannabinoids in the brain, which are understood to be at a deficit, particularly with some neurological symptoms, PTSD, migraines in particular, chronic pain. So think about exploring the use of these oils and reading about them more. Putting it all together in a smoothie, that's what I did for lunch today. It's simple to integrate for a child, for an adult, for a quick meal on the run. You can get powdered nutrients. I work with a number of clients who don't want to swallow capsules or who can't. I can add my liquid oil. I can add a little powdered green tea. I can add a probiotic powder. If I'm short on protein, I can add a fresh hemp protein. I can add berries or mango, any kind of frozen fruit. I've got my fruit for the day, and then I can sweeten it with a little stevia. And you can really play with your ingredients as you create this wonderful nutritional drink for you and your clients. So what are our next step resources as we consider what we've explored today? I want to provide you with some options as you think about the next steps as you do nutritional psychoeducation or even move into mental health nutrition as a primary clinician or as a collaborating clinician. My clinical textbook, Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health, explores in clinical detail much of what we've discussed today and more. My book, Eat Right, Feel Right, provides 50 recipes plus tips and ideas that is written not only for you but for your client to understand some of the basic principles we've talked about today in non-clinical language. The Good Mood Kitchen is a cookbook that will be out this fall. I have a book, Rhythms of Recovery, Trauma, Nature, and the Body, my first clinical book, which is devoted to integrative medicine for the treatment of complex trauma. Multicultural workbook, which intersects some of what we've talked about today about ideas, recipes, and exercises we can do so that we're culturally competent with our clients, and particularly looking at nutrition and health and well-being and health practices. Preventing and Treating Diabetes Naturally, the Native Way, was written in collaboration with Native colleagues in the Pacific Northwest. I update some of this content on my Psychology Today blog. I do coaching and supervision for clinicians who want to go the next step. We have a 7-hour PESI CE training in integrative medicine for mental health that explores this and many modalities for treatment. And then coming soon, nutrition and integrative medicine, mental health certification through PESI as well. I welcome hearing from you. I've given you my contact information. Nothing brings more joy to my life than sharing this information and helping you see where it applies in your own life and in your own practice and how you can integrate psychoeducational nutrition to improve the quality of your clients' lives. Thank you so much for spending this time.